Good day. The last couple of hours on the main front of the war in Donbass, the situation appears to be continuing to deteriorate for Ukraine. It's never easy to get clear pictures of what's happening on the battlefields because always there are contradictory statements. A couple of days ago, for example, the Russians and their allied forces claimed that they'd cut all the road links into Severodonetsk, Lysychansk. It seems that that might have been premature, that at least two of the roads are still open, though both are subjected to regular shelling now by the Russian military. And it seems that Ukrainian drivers, including military drivers, are very reluctant and in some cases straightforwardly refusing to use these roads. And in addition to that, there's also been considerable confusion about the exact situation within Severodonetsk itself. Both the Russians and the Ukrainians now accept that fighting is taking place within Severodonetsk. The Russians, a few days ago, to be precise, Ramzan Kadyrov, the head of the Chechen government, who's also an important military leader in this war on the Russian side, Ramzan Kadyrov claimed that Severodonetsk had been fully captured by the Russians. I expressed some skepticism about that claim after I reported it, and it is indeed in fact the case that it's clear that fighting is still going on in Severodonetsk, though most reports suggest that it's now reached the center of the city and that around 40% or perhaps half of the city is now under the Russian control, and that the rest of it is likely to be captured by the Russians shortly. Now, by the way, the fact that there is ongoing fighting in Severodonetsk is a sign that the Ukrainian leadership has apparently again rejected the advice of its military officials to try to withdraw the Ukrainian troops from Severodonetsk and Lysychansk in the hope that they can be saved that way and redeployed to other theatres. Instead, they are left fighting in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, trapped in this urban conurbation, where they will doubtless eventually be defeated and captured by the Russians. And this is something that has baffled many people, and including the Russians themselves. And I'm going to quote now from a comment made by a Russian military blogger about the state of the battle in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. And this is what this blogger says. And I don't know much about this person, but he's consistently been one of the more interesting writers about the state of the war. And as we will see, he's far from being somebody who writes mere Russian propaganda. He's somebody, on the contrary, who shows a very realistic understanding of the war and of where it is going, but who remains baffled by Ukrainian military tactics. Anyway, this is what this particular blogger said about and specifically about the fighting in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. The very fact of taking a city is gratifying, but without cauldrons, that means encirclements of troops, small and large, in general, it doesn't give anything. For if the enemy troops withdraw, these troops, having gained experience in urban battles, will strengthen the second triangle of Ukrainian troops at Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and Artemyevsk. And if they retreat from there too, the Ukraine will have a grouping of hardened, combat-ready troops capable, after rest and replenishment, of attacking themselves or defending themselves in some other city. At the same time, before leaving, such a defense group will turn any city into ruins and inflict losses upon us, that's to say the Russians. And for the moment, there is no cauldron in Severodonetsk, Lysychansk. There is the main route, which is under fire control quite tightly, and there is a secondary route which is partially shelled. Both can be used by the enemy if he decides to withdraw. And the blogger then goes on to say, withdrawal means that the enemy has changed his mind about dying en masse and has moved on to flexible tactics. This would not be good for us. We have few people, he means few people in the Russian army operating in Ukraine. We will either have to sharply increase the number of our troops in the event that that happens, or there will be problems. There is nothing good in the fact that a fool grows wiser, first of all for his opponents. War is not about taking cities. War is about destroying the enemy's troops. And more so, not about how many people, about how many military facilities and equipments have been destroyed, because it is very difficult to restore them. So note the words, war is not about taking cities, war is about destroying the enemy's troops. We've actually discussed this often on the Duran. We were talking about this very much on the Duran and on this channel at the start of the war, that Western commentators who talk about the failure of the Russians to capture places like Kiev and Kharkiv and Chernihiv have misunderstood the Russian way of war. The Russians always aim to destroy first and foremost the enemy's army, thereby destroying the enemy's ability to resist. They're less concerned about capturing cities, though, as I will discuss in a moment, there are some cities which are important to them and which they will, of course, defend. Anyway, that brings me back, though, to the question of why are the Ukrainians pursuing these tactics? Why is the Ukrainian political leadership ignoring the advice of its own military high command? Why is it continuing to order Ukrainian troops to stand and fight in places like Mariupol previously and now in Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, facing certain destruction when this seems to play directly into Russian hands? Well, I think we've had an explanation for this in certain comments which President Zelensky of Ukraine has made as he has carried out a recent tour of the battlefields. Now, unfortunately, when it comes to repeating President Zelensky's comments, not only are they often very garbled and confusing in themselves, but there are often many different translations and accounts of them, and it's not always clear exactly what he did say. But to the best of my understanding, what President Zelensky said was that he understands that there has to be a negotiation with Russia to end the war. He also accepts that it is beyond Ukraine's strength to recapture places like Crimea or even Donbass, to push the Russians out of those territories that they control. What, however, Ukraine needs to do is to go on the offensive. It needs to recover territory, because only by doing so will it put itself in a stronger position in the negotiations which must come. So the logic of that, presumably, is that Ukraine mustn't give up territory, because that weakens its bargaining position, and it must try instead, where it can, to recover territory. And this no doubt explains this other decision that the Ukrainian leadership has taken, which is to order another counteroffensive in the direction of Kherson region, presumably trying to recapture the important town of Kherson, a town which, because it is the capital of Kherson region, I suspect the Russians will defend. Now, there's been much discussion about this. There's an article in the Daily Telegraph telling us about this great successful Ukrainian offensive. Some of you may remember the equally triumphalist articles about the great successful Ukrainian offensive in northeast Kharkiv region, which in the end failed to achieve any of its objectives and which has now gone into reverse, with the Russians recovering much of the ground that they ceded. It's not, again, always easy to get a clear picture of what's been happening with respect to Kherson region, this offensive in Kherson region. But initial indications are that the spearhead of the Ukrainian troops was caught in open territory by Russian artillery, has suffered very severe losses, and that the Ukrainians, after gaining only a small amount of ground, were pushed back into headlong retreat. So far from the triumphant advance that the Daily Telegraph is talking about, we've had another failure, rather like the failure we had a few weeks ago when the Ukrainians tried to recover Snake Island on the eve of the Russian celebrations of Victory Day on the 9th of May. This has been another attempt to try and capture territory from the Russians, and so far at least it seems to have failed, though the Russian High Command apparently expects the Ukrainians to renew this attempt at an offensive in this particular region of Ukraine. And by the way, and whilst I'm on the subject, we've also received reports that the Russians identified the command center of the Ukrainian forces that are undertaking this offensive, that they launched a massive missile strike against this command center, that large numbers of senior Ukrainian officers were killed, and that the command center, the headquarters, was destroyed, and that up to 3 Ukrainian generals are dead. I want to say straight away that there is no doubt at all that this missile strike did take place, but whether it really did destroy a command center and whether these Ukrainian commanders were indeed killed, well, that obviously I cannot confirm. But regardless, this, I think, explains, we now have an explanation for these attempts by Ukraine to mount counteroffensives. The Ukraine, part of the rationalization of these counteroffensives is that they supposedly draw Russian troops away from the main battlefields in Donbass, but the other part of it is to try to regain territory, supposedly in order to put Ukraine in a better position in negotiations. In reality, if Ukraine were to regain territory, if it were, for example, to recapture Kherson city, then I doubt that the Ukrainians would, in fact, negotiate. They would probably become dizzy with success, and they would say that they have no need to negotiate anymore because they're winning the war. But it's understandable, in the meantime, that people like President Zelensky, his political advisors, the officials who are backing this war in Washington and London and Brussels and elsewhere, that they all want to see some sign of Ukrainian success on the ground so that Ukraine can go into the negotiations without looking obviously defeated. The problem is that the risk of that is that these attempts to regain territory will simply result in more Ukrainian troops being killed, that they will fail, that the attempts to hold on to places like Severodonetsk and Lysychansk will also result in more Ukrainian troops being killed, that the Russians far from losing territory, will acquire more of it, that they will have advanced further their objective of destroying the Ukrainian army, and that in fact, far from Ukraine having strengthened its negotiating hand, it will have weakened it. But there we are. That's, it seems to me, the trap that Ukraine has worked itself into. And it probably also explains this very, the way in which Ukraine now is clinging increasingly to this idea that Western weapons deliveries, Harpoon missiles, M777 howitzers with their Excalibur shells, the M270 multiple rocket systems, that they will somehow shift the balance of the war in Ukraine's favor. In other words, reliance, hope on wonder weapons. Now, about the Harpoon missiles, I have little to say. I'm not a technical person. On the Excalibur shells of the M777 howitzers, all I would say is that there's now extensive reports that the Russians are successfully jamming GPS signals across Ukraine. Apparently that's why the Switchblade kamikaze drones, which rely on GPS signals, have been unsuccessful. Apparently the Excalibur shells also depend on GPS. GPS. If GPS isn't operating or isn't operating efficiently, then it seems to me that these Excalibur shells are just so much expensive hardware that is lying around and doing very little. And as for the multiple rocket launcher systems, Jacob Dreisen has done another brilliant discussion of these multiple rocket launch systems. On the Dreisen report, you can see the video. It's available on Rumble. And he points out, Jacob Dreisen has pointed out, that the reason that Ukraine is never going to get enough of these systems to make a difference in the fighting, quite apart, as I said in my previous video, that these multiple rocket launch systems would simply be replacing older Soviet systems which Ukraine has already lost. But the logistical constraint on supplying these systems is that the ammunition that these systems expend is simply enormous, and Ukraine and the United States is not in a position to supply the necessary amount of ammunition to make these multiple rocket launcher systems effective, and Ukraine doesn't have the transport system to support these systems in the field, given the completely different calibers from Soviet systems and Russian systems that these American systems have. So we can see problems with all of these wonder weapons. Even the Harpoon missiles, I suspect, are not going to make the decisive difference that the Ukrainians imagine that they will. So what is happening is that the Ukrainians are throwing away precious lives, losing territory, losing places like Severodonetsk and Lysychansk in pursuit of what I suspect is a fundamentally misconceived strategy. A strategy in this war which is based not on military considerations, but on political ones. And ultimately, dare I say it, on presentational, or even, if you like, propaganda ones. And that, of course, brings me now to the other side of what's going on, because, of course, just as we have lots of talk about, Ukraine receiving all these miracle weapons from the West, we've had all kinds of claims about how the Russians supposedly are running out of supplies. And there was all those pictures of T-62 tanks. These are old Soviet-era tanks from the 1960s, which supposedly the Russians have brought out of store and are, they're lumbering around because they've lost so many of the more advanced T-72s and T-90s. I should say I never took that story very seriously because I've heard earlier reports that the Russians have around 20,000 T-72s in store, and the Pentagon claims that they've lost around 1,000 T-72s in the fighting, which I suspect is an overestimate, a significant overestimate. So it doesn't look to me as if the Russians are in any serious danger of running out of T-72s. But putting that aside, it seems, and here again I'm drawing a lot from Jacob Dreisen, it seems that this story about the T-62s is wrong, that it's in fact fake news, that some of those pictures of T-62s show T-62s in Syria with the Syrian army, and that one of them shows old T-62s being moved around on a train in Russia itself, far from the front lines, quite possibly intending for scrapping. I mean, I don't know. But anyway, without any real relevance or connection to the war. So that story looks like it was a desperate clutching at straws. And I have to say, there's been another example of dangerous clutching at straws today, this time in the Financial Times, where I've read about the fact that the Russians are supposedly now so seriously short of microchips that they're running around pulling microchips out of refrigerators up and down Russia, so as presumably to install them in missile systems. I mean, I think this story is a ludicrous one, to be honest. It doesn't look at all well sourced, and again, I completely disregard it. But we see how, again, these hopes, these ideas, these expectations of something suddenly happening that will change the balance of the war are circulating around as Ukraine desperately tries to put itself again back on the front foot, or as it believes on the front foot. It rationalizes it, it's to improve its position, its bargaining position in negotiations, but in reality it's because they can't face that they're losing the war. Well, as this is happening, we're getting further reports about European support for Ukraine, for the sanctions war crumbling. And I discussed in my previous video how Putin has had to receive a whole succession of phone calls from European leaders, from Mario Draghi of Italy, from Nehammer of Austria, from Macron and Olaf Scholz of respectively France and Germany. And we have had further confirmation that the EU solidarity is crumbling. Yesterday there was another angry complaint from Robert Habeck, the Green German Vice Chancellor and Economics Minister, who's actually said that support for sanctions in Europe is crumbling. And this morning there was apparently a failure within the EU to agree the terms of another oil. And there was another attempt to impose another oil block on Russia, an import ban on Russian oil. Apparently that failed. No consensus was reached. There's apparently going to be a further meeting this afternoon on Monday, when there'll be at least an attempt to try to get some kind of political agreement about this. Viktor Orban of Hungary has previously said he doesn't even want to discuss this issue. Ursula von der Leyen and the EU hardliners, presumably wanting to put Orban in a difficult position, have insisted on discussing the oil ban. We'll see how all this goes. But already there's been discussions about carving out exemptions for some countries, for Hungary, for Slovakia, for the Czech Republic, of limiting any oil ban just to shipborne oil a idea that the Hungarians earlier floated and which is then rejected, but now is being adopted. There's been concerns that this will create distortions in the European energy market, so that the price of oil will be cheaper, of petrol will be cheaper in Hungary than it is, say, in Germany. Well, we'll see where the Europeans are going on all of this, whether they are able to sort out this oil ban, import ban, over the next few days. But certainly the situation there does not look good. It looks increasingly, in fact, as if more and more European countries are becoming increasingly skeptical about where this whole thing is going. And we've also heard further complaints from the Ukrainians that Ukraine is not getting the heavy weapons from Germany that the Germans supposedly promised. So I can't again see that this decision by Ukraine to conduct this war, to continue this war, makes much realistic sense. In fact, it's so illogical to continue with this war at all that it is pushing Ukraine into illogical and highly self-destructive tactics like those of trying to cling on to places like Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, throwing away the lives of its soldiers in doing so. But that seems to be the trap, the mental trap, into which Ukraine's leaders have worked themselves up into. Now, I don't know how much longer this can continue for. I'm not somebody who has the military skill or the military logic or the military knowledge to be able to discuss timetables and plans. But again, I repeat what I said in my previous video. I think Ukraine only has a fairly short time window in order to get this situation resolved through negotiations before the Ukrainian army is so badly mangled that the Russians no longer see any reason in negotiating with Ukraine at all. In his discussions with Scholz and Macron and Nehammer and Draghi, Putin did say that Russia is still open for negotiations. Well, that's Putin. Many other Russians take a very different view. They already say that negotiations with Ukraine are pointless and a bad idea and one which should be dropped. We'll see whether Putin sticks to his view that there is some merit in continuing negotiations, though increasingly on his terms, if Ukraine changes its position. If it doesn't, if Ukraine continues to fight and lose, then there will inevitably, it seems to me, come a point when even Putin says enough is enough and let us continue this war until we reach that point, that conclusion, where we no longer have to negotiate further, but can simply dictate terms. Well, there we are. That's, it seems to me, where we are at this moment in the war. We'll see what Ukraine does, whether they press on with more offensives in Kherson region, in Kharkiv region, whether they try to cling on to their various towns and settlements in the Donbass. We'll see what the Ukrainians do. Thank you for joining me again today for this program. I look forward to you joining me again for future programs on this channel. And remember that you can also find me on our main channel, the Duran, and you can also check us out on our various other platforms, Rumble and Locals. If you are watching this program on Rumble, if you go to the top of the video, you will see a red maroon button there. You can press that red maroon button. It will take you directly to our Locals homepage, where we have a thriving community. You can join that community. You can read the exclusive content that we are publishing there. I've recently done a massive program on the state of the Russian economy under sanctions, which you're welcome to read, to watch, even though it's very long. It's exclusive to locals. You can join us, or you can join us on Locals for my Wednesday live streams, which take place exclusively on Locals every Wednesday at 1400 hours Eastern Standard Time. And of course, you can also publish your own exclusive content on Locals as well. And we're not just on Rumble and Locals, but on other platforms too, on SuperU, on ODYSEE, and we have our own Telegram channel, and we're present on other platforms as well. And also, you can support our work via Patreon and Subscribestar. And don't forget to check out our shop, where you'll find all the great things that we have there. Our magic mugs, our hoodies, our sweatshirts, our t-shirts, and all of the rest. And last but not least, if you've liked this video, you can please remember to press the like button and also to check your subscription to this channel. Thank you for joining me again today. More from me soon. And have a very good day until then.